Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Armory Center for the Arts. Thank you for joining us here today for this amazing panel. I'm super excited for it. My name is Eber Rodriguez. I'm the Director of Exhibitions. Um, um, I've been so excited to be a part of this project that we started in 2019, that is curated by Irene Georgia Satsos, my predecessor here at the Armory Center for the Arts. Um, and so I'm going to turn it over to Marcus Zúñiga in just a second, but I just want to invite you all to see the exhibition from the ground up, Nurturing Diversity in Hostile Environments. If you haven't done so already, the exhibition will be open after the panel, and I invite you all to check it out and see Marcus's work while you're there. A couple other points. We have a community care room right now in response to the fires that have devastated the neighborhoods of Altadena and Pasadena. It's open from 12:30 to 5:30 every day. If you know anybody who needs a space to rest, learn, we were hosting a couple of the classrooms from schools that were affected by the fires. So if you can just help us spread the word to get us anybody who needs that space, we'd be happy to receive them. So yeah, thank you all again. So I'm really excited, mostly because we had conversations with a lot of the artists who are in this exhibition about potential programs. Marcus shared a dream that he had with us that helped realize this panel conversation. So I'm going to turn it over to him to get us started.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for being here today. I wanted to start first, before we bring everybody up, with a presentation on the project I have in the exhibition. And so I'll just start with that. So I also want to start with a major thank you to the team here at the Armory for organizing this exhibition and supporting our work and our event today. And also start with, I'm starting with a lot of things, but I'll start as well with noting that by calling this program a Mutualista, we're working from a Chicano tradition that is about gathering and exchanging ideas, and ideas that are coming from different fields and communities. And today we're coming together particularly through art. So my installation is called Mutualism Imager, which draws on its inspiration from the yucca of my home in Nuevo Mexico. This knowledge and ancestry is what I inherit from my abuela. In this image, she and I are holding the yucca blossom during one of our walks on the llano. I believe the yucca inhabits a model of environmental healing in the 21st century, a time in which our concept of what constitutes the environment needs to include the cosmos and the human. The yucca seed pod is the home of the yucca moth, who lives its entire life in and is the main pollinator of the yucca. In biology, this form of exchange is called mutualism, where each organism benefits from each other. The yucca and the moth are particularly special because their mutualism is hosted by the arid desert, in which neither could survive without the other. The black seeds of the yucca are the nourishment for the moth, and when energized by the sun and rain, they are the future of the desert. As I come into this knowledge through my work, I think of it as participating in a centuries-long healing tradition where we are recovering not only what has been forgotten, like the knowledge of lost codices, but also how to apply this knowledge to help address the environmental psyche that struggles to constantly recover as global weather disasters increase each season. A guiding principle form in the work is the quincux. The quincux is an arrangement of objects with 4 at the corners of a square or rectangle and a 5th at the center. I first came to the Quincux through Erika Buenaflor's book, Cleansing Rites of Curanderismo, in 2021, which I remain reliant on as a source that I'm continually learning from. In curanderismo, the quincux is used for building spaces in Olympia that reflect the principles of cosmology, the four directions, and a center place that act as the coordinates of space and time in the cosmos. The Olympia altar incorporates different materials depending on the type of ceremony, as seen in the altar made here by curanderas Rita Perez and Tonita Gonzalez. I started to identify the quincux as a possible form in the geometry used for the primary designs of major telescopes and observatories. I saw it most distinctively in the cosmic background imager that was based in the cosmic background imager that was based in the Atacama Desert of Chile and in operation by Caltech from 1999 until 2008. It was a radio telescope, and its array of dishes changed based on the different observational parameters. The obsidian mirror was the seeing object of the ancient Mesoamerican world. It is a portal to the world of the spirit. Mirrors were metaphors for many subjects: flowers, the sun, the eye, the face, butterflies, spiders, sometimes many subjects simultaneously. In my work, the mirror is a material that can carry a multitude of meanings represented in a single conceptual, visual, minimal, and cosmic form. In our time, there is much to contend with when an artist makes their work in the land. Art history tends to obscure many artists who make more sense to celebrate in consideration of the contemporary context we exist within. A lesser known earthwork that I referred to is Marcia A. Gomez, Madre de Mundo, that was initially installed at the Nevada missile test site during the Mother's Day peace action protest in 1988. I look to the Silueta by Ana Mendieta here in the mirror, performance for the camera in the land where she studied art, Iowa, as an exile of Cuba. This tradition of deep social bond to location brings me repeatedly back to Nuevo Mexico. In the southwestern region of the Gila, my abuela tells me that her adoptive mother's lineage is connected to Francisco Benavides, who was among the Mexicanos that first farmed in the land there. She says that they may have named the village for him as Frisco, but would later be renamed by Anglo settlers as reserve for the Forest Service. It is the village where we have shared lived experiences for 6 generations spanning across 3 centuries, where generations have migrated from Chihuahua State and Socorro County, where Apaches have circulated for many more countless generations, where homes have been made, where nature is always present, and where Abuela raised her 5 sons. The Mutualism Imager installation follows the trajectory of my recent works that each began with an outdoor ceremonial photo shoot done in advance of the exhibition of the work. I timed this with the fall equinox, and the area had been seeded with a rich monsoon's summer rain. It brought out fields and mountains of sunflowers, making over the area unlike anything I'd ever seen before. This was nearby the area where the installation was set up. It was alongside an old road that went from Frisco to Mogollon. I have worked in this space before. It is about half a mile away from the river that borders the southern edge of Lower Frisco. I was in search of the natural northern alignment in the land that could orient the sun and moon alignments that I had built into the sculpture using this area's coordinates. Abuela and I quickly found this location, and my father helped me assemble the sculpture. It was exactly noon on the fall equinox when we finished, and I began to photograph the work in alignment to the northern mountain overlooking Frisco. The north-south axis was made from white corn and yucca seed pods. The axis is a gesture to give to the environment a deposit of nourishment that could possibly spring new life. Each of the obsidian mirrors points to a different alignment and reflects the sun onto the obsidian stone that sits at south. Together, they create a volume of space that mimics the form of the seed pod. For the installation here at the Armory, the path of the light is represented by a rope that I wove out of yucca leaves. The obsidian mirror has spiritual memory. When you stand before it, when you look into it, your image becomes a record in the catalog of images that build its archive. Mutualism Imager is a work of art that models attributes of the yucca seed pod, home of the yucca moth. Its seeds are obsidian mirrors, carrying spiritual memory of ancestry. And so now I think we can have our panel come up. So we have Erika Buenaflor, who's incredible curandera and author of many books. You have David Delgado Shorter, who is coming from UCLA today. And we have Jorge Moreno, who is an astrophysicist who teaches at Pomona College. And so, yeah, so, here we are coming out of one of the most devastating environmental disasters ever in the city. And so many are working to answer the question, how do we move forward? And how do we do that, with so many different perspectives to consider? I feel like our conversation today is very much an experiment, so we'll just see how things go. But I think we can find overlapping interest and themes between each other. And so, the kind of questions I want to focus on are ones that are thinking about reimagining our relationship to the cosmos, our connection to the cosmos, our very conception of the cosmos. And I'll put it a bit more simply, where I'm thinking to ask you all, how do you envision the ways we can reimagine the cosmos to better serve the challenges of our time? So we could go down the line, or whoever feels ready to go with it.
Okay, I'm Jorge. Thank you for having me. So thinking about the cosmos, I was thinking this morning about this question. And in 1997, Janine Benyus coined the term biomimicry. What that means is you look at what nature is doing, and then we can be inspired by that to design things. For example, if you look at a termite colony and you look how the different tunnels are organized, then you can design a building that is very energy efficient and that is inexpensive for communities, right? So a couple of years ago, I coined a term called astromimicry. And the idea there is not so much to use astronomy or the cosmos for designing physical things like a building, but more like how we organize ourselves as people, right? So one example that comes to mind is dust. I think with the recent fires here in Altadena and Pasadena, this dust is settling. And in astronomy, when we talk about dust, we mean soot, which is basically smoke. And you might think, well, that has a really negative connotation, especially after what happened. But if it weren't for cosmic dust, we wouldn't be here today. And the way it works is as follows. For us to be alive, you need molecules. Because in order to create a star, you need molecules to cool down that gas. Well, molecules are really fragile things. If you see light coming from the rest of the universe, those photons, these energetic particles, are going to destroy the molecules. But if you have dust, the dust is going to protect the molecules. And then the molecules can cool down the gas, and then you can have a star, planets, and life, and all of us, right? So in our communities, we can be inspired by that and say, well, what can we learn from cosmic dust? And the way we think about it is two things. In our communities, some of us are very vulnerable, others aren't, for some reason or another. So in the case of the cosmos, the molecules are very vulnerable, but they're essential to life. And the dust is more resilient. It maybe has more access, maybe has more privilege, more resources. So the role of dust is to protect the molecules and to foment their growth. So with astromimicry, we can also employ that with ourselves. All of us are vulnerable, all of us have some privileges, but we can actually tap into that privilege and that power and that access to protect and uplift those who are more vulnerable than us in our community. So that is one way for us to reconnect with the cosmos, is to not just observe it, but also be inspired by it in ways we can organize ourselves.
So, taking a note from my indigenous ancestors and how they saw the cosmos was they saw it as a very eclectic, dynamic, always in flux. But it, one of the things is, as Jorge was mentioning, that there's also, for example, when a supernova would explode, and we have images of NASA of like one of Vesica Pisces, which is two circles coming together, joining in two concentric circles in the center of that. And there's an image from Mesoamerica of also the sun and also the night, and also the star exploding, and they're recreating into something new. So even at this like chaos, there is a yearning for balance, a yearning for new stars. There's a star that just died, but then it exploded and became something new. And this was expressed in their philosophies, in their mythologies, always in flux and always trying to find and regain balance. And I see this now, with my own, that was something very inspirational to me, and how I began on this journey was what's happening right now is this extreme, and I'm just gonna say this extreme that has been going attacks with ICE raids, with the border patrol, and people even like waving Nazi flags in front of their houses and thinking that's okay, and saying, let's lean into racism. And then at the inaugural with Elon Musk, like doing, Hitler, like, a salute, and just like, holy moly. For me, that inspired me. In the early 90s, there was Pete Wilson, who proposed a Proposition 187 against immigrants, preventing any kind of health care, access to school. Oh, you can work in our fields, but just don't go to school. And also ended affirmative action. Later on, that inspired me because there was this deep, just pull of racism. There was a lot of young Chicanx, me, like a lot of us out in the streets, like protesting. We didn't cross the border crossed us. My blood is red, my blood is red. And even though my roots as a curandera, and that went in my, really seeped in with my great-great-grandmother, I still became an attorney for 10 years, did social justice work, and it just kept getting pulled back, kept getting pulled back. And what I do in this privilege, and I'm seeing this on a national scale, is, I have a little bit of a privilege in social media influence, and in my books and in my mentorship program, is I inspire critical thinking. I inspire those to, what Toni Morrison encourages us to do is don't just take a definition, tell people what it is to decolonize, tell people. And I feel that in the cosmos, how it's expressing us, it's this attempt to balance. And I feel that, what I tell people, when you see all these sad, horrible things going on, it's radicalizing us. It's radicalizing because a lot of people that weren't speaking out are speaking out now. And I think that that's a way that regaining balance. So thank you.
Beautiful. I don't know if I have anything to add specifically on. What I think about is my academic training and how cosmovision was sort of this really popular term back in the early 90s. I go back that far in college. And cosmovision was supposed to replace worldview because it was more Latin American centric and it was speaking to indigenous concepts. But it was also critiqued as being very ableist because it had vision as part of it rather than other ways of knowing and sensing. And so it was trying to lean away from this Western predominance of always something being visual. And I connect that to one of my graduate professors, Donna Haraway, who talks about the God trick of the very first time we ever saw Earth from space. And it created a notion that we were this thing. There's no proof that we are this thing that's any distinctly different than any other thing. There's this thing that happens, though, when you start thinking you have an answer for the whole picture. And I think that word cosmic and cosmos is really big. But, when I went back to interview my grandma, who was a curandera, and I would ask her certain questions as a college student in 2 hours from where you grew up, she would say, I don't know anything about that. She knew what she knew, and then she wouldn't say anything about what she didn't know. And I see that like repeating itself when I, apprentice in Mexico with healers there, like More Kame from the Ome tribe. Like I would propose these like really academic things, and he'd be like, I don't know about that. That's not what I do. Someone walks in, I have a relationship with them, I have a dream for them, or I notice something in the morning about something that a bug is doing, and I know it's about someone who's going to show up later. It's like duplicating that mimicry. I love that. It was a great concept, but it wasn't an attempt to create answers about God or evil or anything like that. It was more about who are you in relationship with, and I think perhaps that word cosmos, what comes up for me immediately is this like heed, like, okay, let's have the conversation, but let's not try to be logocentric. Like, let's not assume that we're going to be able to figure it all or know something, because there's a real hubris in that would go against a lot of indigenous concepts of how to move forward in the world.
Right. I feel like, that the work that I'm pursuing as an artist is centering cosmic subjectivity, which is a big thing, because I constantly reiterate to people that the cosmos is all that is. So diversity is at the core of that, and the narrative which we've been served for so long that I think everybody has something to say about is a Western sort of storytelling of the cosmos. That's the first story that we learn through in the United States, in the West, and that there's this process of unlearning that has to happen that centers other perspectives, and it's so to achieve something that's innately or truly cosmic feels quite impossible because there's so much to consider. But what we can work toward and what we can, and I think, build progress with is where we're just taking an additional perspective and adding it into our equations. And I feel like, I kind of want to add something that Jorge has done that I love. Let me see. So the way I praised it here is Jorge thinks of galaxies as complex beings, and I love that so much because that's how I think of galaxies too. and that their properties portray their histories. And I think it was your team that was made a recent sort of discovery of dark matter deficient galaxies, and that provided you a pathway to institutionally name those galaxies after the 7 Cherokee clans. And so I just wanted to drop that in here and see everyone's thoughts of this example as a form of this kind of cosmic reimagining.
Yeah, I mean, you use this reference of the West, which I find very common among the students that I engage with at the university, which is an incredibly horizontal view of the 4 directions, which is not itself a cross-cultural concept. You have a lot of indigenous peoples who have histories that are emergent and upward rather than across. And so I sort of feel like we immediately in conversations like these have to start questioning the categories we're using and the terms we're using. And we don't live in a world in which the educational system is teaching students that things like cosmos or anything like galaxies or even planets are alive. And I've written about this a lot, about our concepts of what is alive are really effed up, primarily because we don't have an intersubjective understanding. And it seems like your work is sort of helping us do that a bit. And then there's another thing which is happening here, which I would also heed us to, which is fetishizing some one culture as having the answers to the universe, which happens a lot with people saying well, this is somehow I can't even use the word Trump anymore, but this is the Trump card I'm going to play because it's native. Well, natives were also struggling to figure things out. I was in a conversation yesterday about the pollinators across Santa Monica and Malibu, and someone had said inside the group conversation, well, we need more native plants, and we need native people here to tell us what plants. And this native chemist said, actually, native plants are not what we need right now because the climate is not what it was. It's getting warmer and it's hotter. What we need is conversations amongst various people from different wisdom systems to help us forward inside this, well, you said it very well. It's a crisis on multiple levels. It's it's what Irene and I were thinking about years ago when from the ground up was that this environment is going to get more and more hostile. And I think that that's a thread that's running through a lot of those works. And I can hear in your passion right now. I tell people all the time, the fires are absolutely emblematic of what's happening socially right now as well.
You know, I remember it was how I got pulled into. I was like, I remember my very first limpia with my great great grandmother. I grew up in curanderismo. I did my first limpia 5 years old, my first barida. Yeah, I was like, my friend, like, let me do a barida. I already just knew this was like in my blood. The bugambilias told me, like, take me when I had a sore throat, and I knew to take the bugambilias when I was like, I wasn't very much connected with that. And, you know, and I was very much like, you know, I had my mentors like, no, you know, fight out there, social justice and that, oh, that's what I'm going to do. And I couldn't conceive that I was going to do the work that I'm doing. I did. It was in my blood and in my heart. And I remember meeting one of my first mentors, and he said he was going to go and they were going to do a house limpia. And it was a new house. And I was like, so I went, and they were talking to the house like it was alive. They were going to and they didn't like stop and get a compass and like, okay, let me figure out what is north, south, east, and west in the center. They were telling me that these were spaces that were alive. Like they were doing the limpia, and they were giving it pulque, they were feeding it, they were talking to it, and they were teaching me like, no, mija, like the house is alive. We care for these things. We care for everything. It made so much sense in my heart. And I kept coming back. I didn't know why. Like my family was like, "Mija, what are you doing there? You're like, you have like a good career, you know, your vocation, your career's doing really well." And it was a passion, that understanding how we are connected to everything. And that's what I now teach to my mentees in terms of caring for your house, caring for your space, talking to the plants, connecting to it, that there is no separation, that there and like it's a rebalance that we're getting, and it's so beautiful because so many people come to me so hungry. They're like, I feel so disconnected. I'm like, let's reconnect you. You know, because I was there. And the first time I really felt it was being there, watching them activate the house and talking to the house like it was alive. And it was just like, I remember crying, like literally crying, because I'm like, I've done this before. I know this. This is me. This is me. And I couldn't tell this to like the associates at the law firms that I was at. It was like, you know, it's just like, but I did limpias. Like I was working full time and I was still doing limpias for folks. It was something that I feel that there is that imbalance, but there's so many of us that are working that like it's going to be a radicalized like yearning to go towards more balance and a connection to everything, and remembrance of a connection, of a cosmic connection. So
we not only look at the universe, we not only study the universe, we are the universe. We're made of the universe, and everybody you love, everybody you hate, everybody you don't know, we were all together at the Big Bang. And many people like me, we study the cosmos through telescopes and with computers. And as we do that, it's important to really challenge the ways we do that and who gets to do it and the methods they use. You will hear a lot of scientists talk about objectivity. And there's this myth that science and scientists are objective, even though their decisions are far from it. For example, you might look at a lot of conversations about finding the oldest galaxy. And you and I were talking about that before. And building the biggest telescopes, even if that means trampling on sacred land, we're going to build the biggest telescope so we can find the galaxies that are farthest away. And the way they do science is, and there is some fascination to it because I really love the way they build instruments, and it really challenges our technical abilities. But kind of like the motivation is a lot like, it reminds me of Manifest Destiny. We're going to colonize the universe, and whoever makes it to the farthest galaxy or the farthest quasar is going to plant their flag or their cross, which I find extremely problematic, right? Even the way we explain galaxy formation has those colonial connotations. So the way a galaxy like our home, the Milky Way, is built is as follows. So the Milky Way used to be many, many tiny galaxies, and through gravity, these galaxies came together, they merged with each other, Just like your grandparents and your parents, they made you, the same was true with the Milky Way. The Milky Way used to be many little galaxies that merged together. So this galaxy has its own ancestry, right? And that is true for you and you and you. Like if I were to have a conversation with you, I'm not only speaking to you right now, but I'm speaking to the product of endless conversations that you had with people, with your parents, with your teachers, with your friends. And not only that, those conversations were informed by their own ancestral branches. So each conversation, each interaction we have is extremely rich, right? So that is one way you can explain how the Milky Way was formed. But if you talk to people in my field, they explain in a different way. They use words like harassment, like when two galaxies are interacting with each other, they call that harassment. Given that we have a huge sexual harassment problem in our field. Then they talk about stripping, like when you're taking material away from the satellite galaxy. They talk when the galaxy loses its fuel, they call that strangulation. And then when the galaxy stops making stars, they call it starvation. And then when a bigger galaxy absorbs another galaxy, we use the term cannibalism. So and this whole picture is called the hierarchical picture of galaxy formation. These are all scientific terms that people use in the literature. So people like me, we challenge that and say like, well, where is that coming from? And what is that language a reflection of? So I was talking to a colleague who is a madrina in a community in Otavalo, in Ecuador. So she works with the Quichua. Her name is Jessie Vallejo. And the way the Quichua explain the universe is through cycles. And that's reminding me of what you were telling me about the supernova. So in galaxies, you have supernova explosions. The galaxy is kind of breathing and it has cycles. And the same is true with nature. For example, if you go outside, it's winter. If you go back a year ago, it was winter too, but it was slightly different. And 2 years ago, it was slightly different. So we have these cycles. Even a month ago, the moon looked exactly the same as it looks now, but the month is slightly different, right? So the way they look at nature is that there are these cycles, like a spiral. And every cycle, there are some similarities, but there is a little bit of difference. And I think we, as people, to resist, one way is to keep that in mind, that this is not our first rodeo, right? This is not the first time we see how brutal capitalism and colonialism can be. And I think we can learn from that. And you mentioned in your question about the dark matter deficient galaxies. So I wrote this paper because I use supercomputers to simulate virtual universes. And colleagues of mine found these galaxies without dark matter. So most galaxies have dark matter. Dark matter holds the galaxy together. But these ones don't seem to have it. And people kind of freaked out. They said, all the models are wrong. We ran our simulations and we found that you can recreate them. But the way they are created is really weird. Because if you have a galaxy like the Milky Way, and you have a satellite, the satellite usually only has two options. Either you assimilate with the bigger one, what we call cannibalism, so you just become a member of the bigger galaxy, or you're completely disrupted. Like a comet going around the sun, you see that it has a tail because it's being disrupted by this gravitational field of the sun. We see that galaxies either are completely destroyed by the more massive one or assimilate to it. And as a person of indigenous ancestry, I'm Huichol, I was thinking, well, that kind of happened to us, right? I only speak European languages. I tend to wear European clothes. I was assigned a European gender. And but here I am, right? So these galaxies, these dark deficient galaxies, they didn't get disrupted and they didn't assimilate. They chose a third path. The third path they chose is to confront the massive galaxy and collide with it multiple times. And it was you might say it was a really violent process, but these galaxies are still here. They survived, but they paid a price. They lost our dark matter. Just like my people, we lost our language, maybe our culture, our cuisine. Some people more than others. But this is a reminder that even though we've gone through this before, we can tap into our ancestors' energies to reimagine new ways to confront these new challenges. It's really easy to despair, just like when you see a supernova, it can be a really scary process. But then, without supernovae, you wouldn't have the elements that you need for life. Okay?
Just like, yeah. Oh, yes, absolutely. To reimagine, it's tapping into our ancestors, you know. as I share in my final book, Veneration, Rites, and Curanderismo, I talked about their ancestry. And, you know, my ancestors, Mesoamerican ancestors, their understanding of ancestry went beyond. It was definitely blood, it went beyond blood. It was cultural ancestors, it was the mentors, it were the leaders. There was a connection, there was a deeper and wider connection and love. And the veneration and the love for that, being able to connect that, because a lot of people, they come to me, they're like, I don't know who my ancestors are. I don't know. I don't know who my great grandmother. I don't have records of that. I don't know. I want to have this connection to my indigenous ancestry, and that's one of the things that's a big reason why it inspired. You know, I know my great grandmother, but I also know that as the lines went down, you know, it was like a split in my family of honoring our indigenous ancestry, and it was like, oh, my grandmother, she was still very much into healing, but she went and became a nurse. She didn't follow the path of curanderismo. I'm one of the one that went reclaiming that, you know. So it's understanding that our ancestry is cultural too. It's understanding it's the land, the cosmos. Those are our ancestors, and reimagining a connection with each other and allowing that to fill our hearts, allowing that to, who do you feel connected to research that, to let that expansion, that connection to our ancestors, to reclaim it to how our ancestors viewed it. How our ancestors viewed it was beyond blood and then some. It was allowing that, because we're going to need that now. We're going to need that now to feel more connected, to reimagine it and to expand that. Because I saw a huge trend in a lot of the Gen Zs. They came to me, do I have a right to indigenize? Do I have the right to study my history? Do I have the right to claim that? And I was like, and for me, I'm like, as a Gen X, like being in the streets marching, like, you know, my blood is red, we didn't cross the border crossed us in Chicana. Like, I'm just like, holy moly, what happened? What happened? I'm like, mija, you know, go tell me. And I asked, like, well, okay, where did your parents from? Where are your parents' parents from? And even then it's like, well, I'm not sure. It's like, okay, well, you can find out not with, you know, the internet, like, who lived there? Who lived there before there? Look at the art there. We have so many resources now that we can reconnect to that and talk to them, nourish them, give them copal in the morning, offer them some water, offer them some fire, give them a candle, talk to them, and they'll start talking to you. Trust me. And they tell me, like, oh, all these like synchronicities that start happening. It's just important of reconnecting to that ancestry and reclaiming that as ours. And it's a way to, like, we hit, we collide with the galaxy, but at the same time, we're reclaiming it too. We're reclaiming it. We're not going to assimilate to it. We're not going to go off in the sun. We're going to reclaim something and make it more beautiful and expansive. So, yeah.
I think I'd like one more comment from you before like we move on.
What if it's not a point? What if it's just like a story? Because I think it's really interesting to me is that, like, you said that it's really important to think about how we've seen all this before, and it's really, the spiral is an incredibly it is actually very cross-cultural across like cultures with generative language systems and not representative language systems, which makes indigenous cultures. So that spiral is really key to thinking about how we've seen it before. And I think all the time about how there's these crises or these elections, and then the university is like, you should go in there and be a really good, like, be there for your students. And I'm sort of like, I'm not really good at being there for my students because we're going to be okay. Like, we've seen this before. Like, if you work with really elder indigenous people, they have seen some horrible, horrible things go down in their cultures. And they've sort of become a bit like Trump. We've seen stuff like that before. Like, we're not invested in your nation. We're not invested in your presidency, like that sort of stuff. And then it starts making you think like, well, everything's going to be okay. And then you made me think about how I was there in Sonora with the tribe I had worked with for 23 years. All of a sudden, one of the healers, Amore Kame, which is the same word as Wirabika, for healer, I thought maybe I could start working with him. And he said, no. But then my dead grandma showed up and told him he had to say yes. And so then he said yes. And then, which I didn't know she was going to do because she doesn't run things by me, I guess. So then I apprenticed with him for a couple months, and I was learning some amazing stuff about the world, stuff that defies objectivity, which is not a thing, but it defies your notion of positivism or what can be real in the world. And at one point he said, one night, he said, this person who came to me today, they were really affected by the fact that they're, got evil in them. And I'm a recovering Catholic. I'm like, I don't think there's evil. And I started thinking about where evil is in our notion, because I think about it a lot right now with Nazism on the rise again and stuff. And I told him I didn't really think there was evil. And he, the next morning, said he was done working with me because he needs all hands on deck around the world. We need to be all understanding what is at stake. And if I don't think there's evil, then my ability as a curandero or healer is going to be limited. I don't have an answer. I left. I still don't know what I think about it. Because,
say something to that. So I think many people confuse acceptance with indifference. Yes, we can say this is a cyclical universe, and it's going to be okay, and then it's going to be bad again, and it's going to be okay, and it's going to be okay, but many people are going to suffer through the process. And I can accept that without being indifferent to the suffering of those who are being marginalized by those events. And rather, it actually, the fact that I have acceptance gives me the fuel to really focus on certain things that I can actually do, things where I have control. So imagine you're in Alaska in the winter, and it's really cold, and you have a piece of glass. What do you call this? A magnifying glass, and you want to start a fire, right? And you have a pile of dry leaves. There are two ways to try to build a fire. One is with the magnifying glass just going around like this, and with the little sun you have, and you're spending a lot of energy trying to light that fire, and you're desperate because you're being bombarded by so much cold and the wind. Or you can just focus on one leaf and all the rays concentrate there, then you start your fire, right? So when you have acceptance without indifference, that's what you can do. You can really focus on the places where you can bring your magic, right? And sometimes it's hard to find that acceptance. I think leaning into your roots and your ancestors is powerful, and everybody can do this, not just indigenous folks. And especially, for example, people whose ancestors were stolen, like now African Americans, they too can do that. It's okay not to know who your ancestors were, because your ancestry is with you all the time. And even my white students are like, well, like I feel like we're the bad guys. I'm like, no, it's like, think about your ancestors. How did they get here? And many of them were escaping persecution or the Holocaust or things like that. So all of us collectively have ancestors. We share that experience, even though some of us received colonialism differently than others. And it's really tempting to say, oh, those are the bad guys and we're the good ones. They are evil and we're good. And I think that's really dangerous. I think the fact that we have people who advocate for Nazism, or people who hate women, or people who support ableism, they are our problem. They are us and we are them. And this is a really scary thing to lean into. But it's important to accept that so we can actually find solutions. And when I express this opinion, I'm not very popular, but it's Alexander Solzhenitsyn. He was a Russian Soviet dissident, and he got the Nobel Prize in Literature. And he said that if only we could just identify all the evil people and like put them in one place and exterminate them, and then all the evil would be gone. But to do that, we would have to cut through half of our heart, right? So as we're thinking about these waves of problems that are coming up, we need to really think hard about the fact that the people who are behind those decisions, they are also us and we're them. And it is until we actually accept that we can actually start finding solutions. How did they get to where they are? How did Trump or Musk or whoever you want to, if you want to personify that movement, how did they get to where they are now? And there is nothing that can prevent you or me from becoming something like that. How do we prevent us from becoming that?
Thank you. Wow. That was fantastic. Yeah, it makes me want to kind of go into some of the ideas I think that David talks about in his work. Um, uh, there's this one lecture that you've done that I think I talked to you about a bit, was the ontological turn towards space justice, and it it's online and everyone wants to see it, but in it you posit a lot of questions that are around that subject, and one of them that I feel like is interesting to put into the conversation right now is I feel like a bit rhetorical. You say, how could one be colonizing Mars when there are no life forms there? And I feel like dropping that in right now because the conversation is getting to a place of the finding patterns that in history that have led to the conditions that we're in today, and how can we shift or collaborate to not find ourselves repeating that history over and over.
Yeah, there's a big pattern in history that I really feel like all four of us are speaking to in your work, particularly as you were talking about obsidian. I think a lot about how in a lot of indigenous cultures, so I used this phrase earlier and it dawned on me that it's probably going to be very odd to hear, but English is a representative language system, which means that we use language to represent an objective reality that exists outside of the language itself, so as if there's something real that's out there. And our language we just use to talk about that. But in generative language systems, the language you use constitutes that reality. And that reality is no different than the language you're using, so that when you speak to something like a house, you're actually acknowledging its subjective experience, that it has a subject to it. That's a really quick way to say how important it is, because when we started as an Indigenous Studies working group saying to NASA and SETI and all these astrophysicists and astrobiologists that you were colonizing Mars, and for those of you who didn't know, Elon Musk literally did the exact same thing Christopher Columbus did before he went to the Americas. He traveled to learn how to turn people into laborers. That was before he was ever on the radar as being Elon Musk. He is absolutely, there's someone before him who was a model of what we've seen before. But all these scientists would say, we can't colonize Mars, there's no people there. You can't colonize where there's no people. So that came from a really important component where the indigenous people were recognizing that, oh, that's right, we're talking to the same people who didn't think they were colonizing our land. And they don't recognize that colonization is a all-encompassing, it's the colonizing of the plants, it's the colonization, it's the introduction of a way of relating or not relating. And that really separates what we would call settler colonialism from colonialism in a lot of ways, which is that we now no longer relate because we see ourselves as separate. We see ourselves hierarchically different. So, and then I go on to in the lecture about the study of dog intelligence that, anyway, we project ideas of what life is and intelligence is and everything else, which is why I've then become a consultant for the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence, because they have been literally looking, and it's in their language, for people, kind of people. They've been looking for intelligences that demonstrate technosignatures, and that means that they are as technologically advanced as us or more so. Those are the only ones that they've actually considered worthy of exploring and who they're listening for. And so that right there tells you what they think is valuable, which it better be intelligence and it better be demonstrated by technology. That's the only thing. We've literally created tools to look for those because we're not looking at anything else. So don't mention at all, David Shorter, that we may have already been contacted. That's not allowed in these rooms. You're not allowed to talk about aliens. David Shorter, stop talking about aliens. Stop talking about extraterrestrials, and stop talking about contact, because that's probably never going to happen in their worldview. I don't know, maybe you're part of other conversations, because the ones that I'm in are very much like, I feel like they're making a space at the table that's a DEI concept of what they want to, like, yay, we're being nice to the native people or the ethnic people or the women in the room to hear their take on colonization. And then we end up leaving there and being like, I'm not quite sure they really heard us. And that's because, as you said, we have to understand the history of things. How would they? Most of these people have never taken a non-STEM class. 100% of the members of the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence are trained in STEM, and primarily 2 fields only. So if they've never taken a gender studies, they've never taken an ethnic studies, and these classes are now being erased from curriculum, then you see the relationship between, I loved how you said this, just focusing, if many of us are focusing on something, we can actually perhaps change the pattern, maybe reverse it, call forward, or activate, as you said with Alice, activate a different future than the trajectory we're on.
So this reminds me of a conversation between Roger Penrose and Stephen Hawking. Roger Penrose is Oxford. He won the Nobel Prize, and Stephen Hawking is Stephen Hawking. And Penrose was really advocating for that. Yes, we need to find intelligent life capable of making antennas and sending radio waves and so forth. And then and Stephen Hawking was like, actually, no, we don't want to send signals, because what if they find us? Because in the model of someone who was a scholar at Cambridge, being found means being colonized, right? So there is a lot of that colonial guilt of that is the only way to operate across civilizations, is by colonizing each other, and this fear of not being found because they're going to do what we did to folks in other continents.
I hope that's not the case. I circling back and bringing back full circle in terms of seeing something as being evil or seeing something as being a dichotomy. My husband and I, he was joking with me, he was teasing me. It's this concept of, this is something different, I'm just going to mention it. It's the concept of being a bodhisattva. And that is, it's essentially this Buddhist concept of those that are going to be here on earth until everybody is able to move forward. And it's something that I've learned about. I studied religious studies. That's one of the masters that I got, and it's something that I loved. I love that concept. And my husband Miguel was making fun of me. He's like, "So does that include Trump? Are you gonna work with him?" and I just was like, and I said, "Yes, of course it does. Absolutely, it does." And and bringing sharing this little story that I talk about in terms of evil and what is separate and something that's different. I remember about 12 years ago, because my mentors taught me a lot of things, and I've seen a lot of things. And there was someone that I did, this was a limpia that I did for somebody who was very depressed, chronically depressed, and I did an egg limpia, and something did come out, but it was something that was still there. And I did this method called it's chupar. It's like to suck it out. And I wouldn't tell my mentee to do that without like proper no way, But I learned, and I knew I could do it. And it's basically like sucking something out and blowing it out, and something that was like draining her. And it was something I thought, okay, it's good. She felt better, and then 2 weeks later, she contacts me and tells me that she missed it. She missed it. She felt good for a while, but then she missed it. And that's like a light went on. And I knew at that point that I wasn't going to do that method anymore, that what I was going to do is I was going to help people work with their shadow aspects. Understand I know my shadow aspect. I know, and I use it as a fear. My shadow aspect is rage. But at the same time, I know how to manage it. I know what the triggers are, and that's what I work with a lot of people in terms of what they see as their demons or evil. And I've seen it. I'm like, I can see it on their plate. It's like, oh, that's not good. But it doesn't, at the same time, it doesn't scare me, because I also know that's not their whole being. That is not who they are in entirety. And if anything, it's if we're going to get along, it's like seeing that. It's like, yeah, I know you. I see you. I am you. I am a part of you. We are a part of each other. Let me show you some things of how to manage that, how to work with that, and how to bring that into alignment. And that is, again, circling back to that understanding of, and it's in a lot of the Mesoamerican art of Vesica Pisces. These two extremes coming in together, and it's the balancing of that. It's the balancing of, there is no separation, and it's this convergence at this conclave of, and they have a lot of beautiful pictures of Yeshua, Jesus, like coming out through that. And I think that's really important right now, that there's not this separation of evil or darkness, and I'd like to think that there are some aliens that are watching us like, holy moly, what are they doing? They need our help. I'm like, please and thank you. So yeah.
I'm so like blown away from all of you, and I'm having a hard time not being super emotional. This is literally like a dream come true. Um, it's you guys are so great. I have one more question, but I also want to open it up to questions. The last thing I was just wanting to posit in the conversation was something I feel like we kind of touched on before, which was coming from Veneration Rights and Erika's, I think it's your most recent book, and this concept of genetic memory, and I feel like that's something that each one of you have alluded to in the way we think about ancestry, and particularly how it reforms our existences today and our understanding of cosmic kind of ideas. So we can either go there, or we can open to questions, whatever feels better. Okay.
For me, one of my students who's Wiraraka or Wichel as well, she's a PhD student, and then she had a kid while she was a PhD student, and she really, when she was going back down to her community, learned that your kids are your parents, and their kids are your grandparents. Like, there's a concept where you're actually being raised by the generation younger you. They're the ones who are going to teach you what you're supposed to learn, not your parents. They're like kids. They were like your kids, which is a reversal of the temporal notion we have of what even genealogy is, right? And the other thing that I would say just quickly that personally makes me think about how you have a lot of people who come to you and say, like, how can I, and when is that? And I'm constantly reminding how many students, I don't know, but like, don't be in such a rush. Like, it'll come to you when you need it, and you'll be called to it. Because when I was sent to my great-grandmother before she died, and she spoke to me for like hours in a closed room, and then I left there crying, and I was so scary because she only had one eye, and she was super old, and her skin was falling off, and she died like a week later. And then a week after that, after she died, she came into my bedroom and said, mijo, it's inside you, and someday you'll get it. And then I had like what you would call a fairly normal life, except for seeing dead people for the next 20 years. But besides that, like, I now realize that a lot of what we call genetic memory is not at all the same as what positivists or objectivists want us to believe is our ancestral link. I think there's something there. And we're just so unable to have that conversation because nothing in our education system has provided us a means to think about those things, because everything non-physical was pushed off the table in the 18th century, really.
So I remember in 2005 I was hiking, and I thought I was actually in Red Rock in Las Vegas. I didn't want to go gambling because I thought it'd be good just to go hiking instead. No, I fell off a cliff. I woke up being airlifted. That day I was told I had a skull fracture, a brain hemorrhage, left AC dislocated, 2 vertebrae in my back fractured. I completely shattered my coccyx. Left leg, I fractured in 3 places. Right leg, all of my bones, knee down, shattered, and came out of my heel. And when they put the bones back in my heel, they put it back with the culture. They didn't do a culture, so they put it with bacteria. So I got severe osteomyelitis. And I mean, long story short, they told me if I walked again, because I lost half the bones in my right ankle, which have been, I don't know, like growing back, like it was going to be with some kind of assistance. And I remember that night, and this was at a time where I had been mentoring with my mentors about almost 7 years, right? And it was at a point in my life, but it was always like one of those things like, oh, why am I studying curanderismo? I don't know. Like, it just draws me. I don't know. Like, and it was at that moment that I finally like heard, like, you have to embrace your don, mija. And I was like, yes. And I feel the don is a gift of healing from God. And I know we all have it. And I was like, yes. Because if I didn't, I was going to be in a wheelchair the rest of my life. I knew that. I was going to be handicapped the rest of my life. And I was in a wheelchair for a year. During that time, I put into practice everything that I learned from my mentors, including sitting in my room where I had this dodecahedron that I built with this light and shadow that I knew was healing me, that I was like guided to do it intuitively. And learning, with the plantitas, the plants, like doing like, and I also learned from sobaderas, that they work with touch. I knew where to heal, like breathe through the pain. And after not walking for almost a year, I walked at the completely normal gait in less than 2 weeks. And, after that time, I never cried. I knew I was going to be okay. When the doctors would tell me all these things, the only time I cried was thinking I had to go back to work as an attorney. I was like, my mom would come in like, yeah, ¿qué te pasa? Like, what's wrong? I was like, I don't want to go back. So at that time, I actually went on a sabbatical and went back to school, and that's when I got a master's, and I studied religious studies. And it was, I remember, I just didn't get, I just wanted access to the library. So every time I'd go and I'd show up to school, I'd like had a cart where I would literally like check out, like my whole thing was like full of like 40 books. Like I'm like dragging it, like I'm so happy, like I'm gonna read all these books. And I remember reading all the codices from my ancestries, and I remember crying because I'm like, I know this. This is me. It was that was when I started experiencing soul retrieval, because it was like lifetimes of sustos, of like claiming back all those pieces that I knew that's like, it's like access to that was part of my genetic memory. It was remembrance, this beautiful remembrance of who I am. And that's just, it's in us, it's in our heart, it's in our being. And as David was saying, it's like we just have to just embrace it and just be patient. Because that's one of my mentors, like my last mentors, because I came to him and he would say, like, Mija, you got to be more humble. And I was like, and I'd get a little upset, like, and he was spot on. He would like have me do a limpia with like, like now you have to go out in the hammock. And this is in the Yucatan, like where the spider's as big as my hand. Like out there, like, and he'd have me do like underneath the candle with the tobacco and this and that. And I'm just like scared. Excuse my language, like scared. Like I was there, but I remember it's like being humbled by that. It's allowing ourselves to just embrace, like when it happens, when we are ready to, the ancestors, when we feel like, yes and please and thank you, yes and please and thank you, that's when we open the door to that genetic memory. When we can bow down and be humble and say, yes, please and thank you, yes, please and thank you, that's when we open that up. So, yeah.
I love that you share that rage. It's your superpower or shadow, or
it's a shadow. It's my superpower. It's all the above.
And I think it's good to embrace that. I do that sometimes, but it's important to remember that nothing is forever. And you can say it two ways. You can say nothing is forever or nothing is forever. That's especially like if you're at the dentist. You're like, oh, this thing is not gonna be forever. Like the pain is gonna go away eventually. A few days ago, I was really mad at someone I love. And I was like, I'm so angry. And my brain was in cycles. And I was like, I'm so hungry. I'm craving tacos. I'm so angry. I need to use the bathroom. I'm so angry. And anger eventually, your rage dissipates eventually. But that was an opportunity for me to reconnect with my ancestors and every part of myself. There are no bad parts in yourself, right? And in that case, it was me. I had to take a step back and really comfort an inner child in me who was triggered by the situation. And so as we raise our mentees for our children, we're also raising ourselves and our parents and our ancestors. And that takes work, but it's worth it. It's worth to know where you are and everything that you've learned, and then you help those parts inside yourself to heal. So when I was little, I was bullied, and it was a really difficult time. I remember what I would do is I would go to my room and I would sense myself as an older version of myself taking care of me, like 30-year-old Jorge or 80-year-old Jorge coming. And that even happens today. Even as I'm older now, sometimes I have stressful situations. I feel like an 80-year-old version of myself was wiser, telling me, like, you're going to be okay. And I feel that that person is healing their inner middle-aged Jorge as we speak, and that's how I am receiving that. So this is an invitation to all of you to reconnect with yourselves, and there is no bad part, and with each other. Thank you.
Absolutely. I mean, so that's such a great place to kind of to kind of pause with, because the invitation to reconnect with ourselves, that's what our activist call is more than anything, I think, today. So with that, I think we can open to questions, a couple of questions. Yeah. Who has a question? It's okay if there's no questions. It's big stuff. Okay, well, I think we're good then. Thank you guys so much for being part of this. This is incredible. You guys, our experiment worked. And please come check out the exhibition. And thank you all so much for being here today. And thank you to the Armory. You guys are doing the real work of the world. So thank you.